What is up everyone on YouTube, and today we are talking about collab units, and that is because we haven't had a rerun in quite some time. Some of these collabs are long overdue for a rerun, so we're basically going to be ranking these collab units. Collab units are basically collaboration units. You know, the game will collaborate with a K-pop idol group such as aespa, or like an anime like Fullmetal Alchemist, and they will release the units from that specific IP. And yeah, we haven't had some of these rerun in quite a while. Some of them are long overdue. One of them actually has never rerun before, the aespa collab, which is very sad because that collab has one of the best units and one of the best artifacts. But we're just going to talk about these units and kind of just rank them in PvP. You guys can see them on your screen here already. We have 4 tiers. We have the meta tier. These 2 units are going to be very frequently played, very strong. The decent tier, these units are still used, just not as frequently as the meta units. They have a little bit more of conditional things that they need going. And then we have the niche units. These units only can be picked in very specific scenarios, but they can be very good in those scenarios. And then of course we have the not used tier. Pretty self-explanatory. These units are either built for PvE or just really undertuned and kind of needs to be buffed, right? So let's start with the meta tier. So this tier is only filled by 2 units. We have Ikrina from the aespa collab and Edward Elric from the Fullmetal Alchemist collab. Now these units are very good at what they do. Both these units are very good against cleave because of their passive. One has that tier push with defense buff and a barrier. Another one just knocks back the debuffs you get hit with onto the enemy side, which is very strong. And both of these units do a ton of damage. Ikrina's S3 is pretty infamous for just one-shotting a ton of squish units, especially with their artifact. And Edward Elric's S3, it ramps up over time, eventually doing a ton of damage as well. Also, these units are fairly easy to build. You don't really need to build them super fast. Honestly, you kind of want them slower and just tankier. And also these units don't really require units around them to make them work very well. Other units below like Jacko or Roy Mustang really need units built around them. Whereas Ikrina and Edward Elric, you can pick them pretty freely and they're still very good. Ikrina is always just going to be a safe pick. Edward Elric, you kind of want to pick into debuffers, but usually in the current metagame, actually right now in the current metagame, a lot of units just have built-in debuffs, so there's not really a lot of units that have 0 debuffs that are good. So because of that, you're going to see Edward Elric is not as niche as you think, but he's still very good in his niche, right? I think both these units are going to be the top of the top for PvP. Ikrina being a little bit higher than Edward, honestly, but you can still see Edward pretty often in RTA. His usage has definitely fallen off a bit, but I think comparative to the other units on this list, he's still definitely worthy of this meta spot. Next, we have the decent units. These units, still very good, but like I mentioned before, they kind of need units around them to be very strong, or they need to be picked against specific units. So first off, we have Jacko. Jacko is going to be an anti, or not an anti, but a cleave unit. So she is a cleave unit. You're going to pick her with units such as Zio, Ran, and she'll just one-shot units with her S3 and S1 because she just completely destroys debuff units, and she can see our push. So she is insanely strong in cleave comps. Probably one of the best cleavers out there, even though it's been a while after her release. She's just really good at abusing those debuffs. And she's also very good in PvE, but yeah, we're not going to talk about PvE. She's good in Ancient Inheritance and also Rift. But for PvP, definitely a decent unit. She's very strong. And honestly, if you don't cleave though, she's probably useless to you. Like to me, I don't even have her built because I don't cleave at all. But if you're a cleave unit or like to play aggressive, or even in Guild Wars offense, you like to run like Zeos or even like, I don't know, Falcon or Clury after her buff, then Jacko can be a very strong unit for you in Guild Wars offense, even if you don't cleave. Next, we have Roy Mustang, and actually let me do this in case you guys don't know these units. Roy Mustang here is one of the best damage dealers in the game. He does a ton of damage. He has built-in hit chance. He has mitigation. You put him on chatty, he's like unkillable. He is weak to ice units, so you have to keep that in mind, but a lot of times in RTA and PvP, especially if you're using him Guild Wars offense, you're not going to really see too many ice units. Mostly you're going to see a ton of moonlight units. Because of that, Roy is very good. You just pick him like 3-4 in RTA or even 4-5, and he's just an extremely powerful unit. Definitely needs like a team around him to mitigate damage and support him, but as a sole damage dealer on your team, like he can just 1v4 and do all the damage you need because he hits extremely hard. Next, we have Rimuru, who's from the Slime collab, and this unit on release was one of the best units in the game for PvP. Even in PvE, he was very strong. but Power Cube actually kind of caught up. And the reason why he's so strong is because his S3 does fixed damage. So against units like Tempest Cern, who's meta at the time, Spirit Eye Celine, anything with built-in damage mitigation, they get one-shot by his S3, which is insane. He also can defense break entire teams. He also could steal buffs with his S2, which is crazy, and his S1 hits like a truck. And also you can build him as a bruiser because he's a warrior. If you just put him on Draco Plate on 100% crit chance, and like, I don't know, 250% crit damage, he still does a ton of damage while being very bulky. Some people build him as full tank just to abuse the fixed damage on his S3, because fixed damage obviously doesn't scale with stats, and also because he can steal buffs more frequently for your team. Really strong unit. Honestly, I see a lot of people play him still, not a lot, but some people, and every time I see him on the enemy side, I feel like he's like god tier, but when I play him, he's not that great. But I think a good spot for him is going to be decent just because he does a lot of things. His kit is heavily overloaded. Next, we have Shuna. So Shuna might be a surprise, and there was a time period, like last year, where she was one of the better collab units, and that was because cleansers was very important in the meta because there's so many cleavers and just openers, and if people banned out Meteor Cowric or picked it, you're kind of screwed. You don't really have a good cleanser for your team or dispeller for your team, and Shuna was that. Shuna can cleanse your team, she puts up a barrier, she can actually, you know, redistribute health, which is very good if you have a knight. And she also has an AoE sleep, which is insane. And I think it's attack buff down as well, or attack down debuff. So very strong. She was a CC machine, also giving your team tons of cleansing and also a barrier. And she can also soul burn her S1 to heal a pretty fat amount, which was very nice. And yeah, her S3 and S2 were just so strong, especially after her exclusive equipment came out. People were trying her out a lot, and they saw a lot of success. But nowadays it's hard to pick her because units are too fast, and also ignore effect resist exists, and yeah, just not really much point to pick her anymore. But you can still use her if you want a good cleanser, right? Next we have Amelia. She is very good in aggressive comps. You S to a unit, that unit one-shots a unit. Pretty simple. She also has some cleansing in her S3, but mostly you're going to use her for her S2 attack buff and 50% CR push. That makes her very strong with units that really need attack buff and really want to one-shot something like Strays or Little Queen Charlotte. After Little Queen Charlotte's buffs, you might see Amelia more because Amelia is Little Queen Charlotte's best friend, basically, because she CR pushes more than a mid for Little Queen Charlotte, while also giving Little Queen Charlotte a bit more bulk because of her healing and her cleanse and her barrier. So she's very good. I think right now she's decent. Maybe she'll go up a little bit in this tier list, but for now I think she's in a good spot as a aggressive attack buffing combat readiness pusher. Next we have the niche tier, so I'm going to talk about these units. Niche, nothing too much in depth because they're very linear, I'd say. Milim is very good against stealth guiding light users. The only thing is you really want her to be faster than the units you're playing against, so you're not going to be able to use her against like Lua, or even something like a Noggle, or even like Briar Witchessaria, because Briar Witchessaria is usually faster. And that just makes her pretty much only good against Landy, and Milim was released pretty much as a counter to Green Landy, just because Green Landy, like this unit here, was one of the best damage dealers in the game for PvP, if not the best at one time, like 2 years ago. And Milim completely shut her down because she removed stealth at the start of her turn on the enemy side. So she would just remove Landy's Guiding Light, Soulburn her S1 with Book, and then S3 after, and one-shot the Landy. But that time has passed, so after Landy's usage plummeted, Milim also went from like meta, decentish to niche. Next we have Winter. So Winter, very good against non-attack skill users. She can refresh her S3 and do a ton of damage at scales similar to Ramirez S3, Edward Elix S3. And it's also fixed damage, which is very nice, so people build her on high bulk, high speed, and high effectiveness. And she has perma stealth, which means Milim's actually good into her, if you think about it. But Winter mostly going to be used on defense teams as a good answer to non-attack skills like Conquer Release and stuff like that. But just not that great, honestly. You can play around her very easily, just don't use non-attack skills and you win. If you fight her in RTA, you can just S1, S1, S1 and not proc her S2 or S3. And if Winter's S2 doesn't proc from non-attack skills, her S3 cooldown is super long. You really rely on that S2 proccing to refresh it, so she becomes pretty useless. So next we have Elfelt. So Elfelt, honestly I think I'm being generous here putting her in niche. She's not really used anymore, but a long time ago she was one of the best cleave units in the game with her defense break and just doing a ton of damage and attack buff actually. So actually I'm gonna probably drop her. She's not really used, but she was technically used in Cleave. She can be used, I guess, if you still want. She was best friends with Basar, Green Basar, and he hasn't been meta in such a long time, so you guys kind of can already tell how long it's been since she's been actually pretty good. Next we have Giselle. She is a very good damage dealer for Cleave. You can pair her with Amelia actually, she gets boosted CR pushes, and she one-shots 2 units. She's very similar to Green Sid, honestly. She has more damage though. I don't really know why people don't use her more for Cleave. Maybe because she really relies on other units to boost her up, while Sid can just be fast himself. So that's probably why, but her damage is very strong single target, one of the highest in the game actually, so makes her a very good single target cleaver. Next we have Rem. Rem is anti-cleave, that is basically it. You can use her against teams that spam AoEs. Those AoE attacks must be not from extra attacks though, because counterattack can't proc on extra attacks. So she's bad against Navy Captain Landy, but against like Beltlian when she was very good, she was good there. So yeah, she's still niche. She's actually still pretty good against Cleave because they have a lot of AoE attacks like Payra and Rang Cleaves. But for now, I can't really place her anywhere higher than niche. A long time ago, she was actually also meta, so you can kind of see what power creep does, especially to these collab units. They kind of like fall slowly over time. And I think Smilegate should maybe give them buffs or exclusive equipments, because right now, even the top meta collab units, Ikarina and Elric, you don't really see as frequently anymore. I think Ikarina is just a league above everything, to be honest, but I didn't want to leave her alone, so this is the tier list. So yeah, if you guys have any disagreements, and if there's a collab you guys would really want to see happen with Epic 7 and Smilegate, let me know in the comments down below. I have some ideas, but I'm just curious what you guys think. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you guys next video.